Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. The White House is defending its decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan as pressure builds to get Americans and Afghan allies out. Evacuation flights resumed at Kabul's international airport Tuesday. Thousands are hoping to flee the country, which fell to the Taliban over the weekend. The U.S. military regained control at the airport after the world witnessed chaotic scenes of people clinging to moving planes during takeoff. Several people were reportedly killed. Earlier, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said this about evacuation efforts.
Throughout the night, 9 C-17s arrived delivering equipment and approximately 1,000 troops. Additionally, 7 C-17s have departed. These flights lifted approximately 700 to 800 passengers, and we can confirm 165 of these passengers are American citizens. The rest are a mix of SIV applicants and third country nationals.
Pentagon officials say they expect the number of evacuees to increase to over 5,000 a day. New polling from Politico and Morning Consult shows public support for the U.S. withdrawal is plummeting. Just under 50% of Americans still support the withdrawal. That is down 20 points from April. This afternoon, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan defended the Biden administration's actions. He said the president was unwilling to consider the alternative.
There are those who argue that with 2,500 forces, the number of forces in country when President Biden took office, we could have sustained a stable, peaceful Afghanistan. That is simply wrong. The previous administration drew down from 15,000 troops to 2,500 troops. And even at 15,000, the Afghan government forces were losing ground. What has unfolded over the past month has proven decisively that it would have taken a significant American troop presence, multiple times greater than what President Biden was handed, to stop a Taliban onslaught. And we would have taken casualties. American men and women would have been fighting and dying once again in Afghanistan.
For more, let's bring in Weijia Jiang, Nikole Killion, and Eli Stokols. Weijia is CBS News senior White House correspondent. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. And Eli is a White House reporter for the Los Angeles Times. Welcome to you all. Weijia, I want to start with you. Let's play a clip of an exchange that you had earlier with White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
Can you offer any guarantee to the Americans and Afghan allies that if they remain there past the end of the month, U.S. troops will help them evacuate past the end of the month?
Weijia, our focus right now is on doing the work at hand and on the task at hand, and that is day by day getting as many American citizens, as many SIV applicants, as many members of a vulnerable population who are eligible to be evacuated to the airport and out on planes. And we're going to do that in an expeditious fashion. That is the focus of the President, of our Secretary of Defense, of our Secretary of State, and everybody on our national security team. So that is where we will keep our efforts. Go ahead.
So, Weijia, now that the situation has deteriorated much more quickly than they expected, how is the Biden administration trying to change its strategy in Afghanistan at this moment?
Well, I think the administration will argue that they're not changing anything, that they had contingency plans for this all along, and so they are just focused on executing them and getting those people evacuated as quickly as possible. But I think judging from that exchange right there, we see that there's still a lot of unknowns, a lot of questions about the process, because I asked Jen Psaki that after I was unsuccessful in getting an answer from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan about a commitment for U.S. troops to remain in Afghanistan past August 31st, which is when the mission formally ends, if there are Americans and Afghan allies still there trying to get out. Several other reporters also tried to follow up just to get that commitment, and he was not willing to say that, yes, we will stay there until everyone is evacuated, until at least every American is evacuated. And as you heard, Jen Psaki did not say that as well. And so even though they are ramping up their efforts, we know the numbers, right? In the last 24 hours, Psaki and other administration officials have said they got about 700 people out. there are tens of thousands of people trying to leave there. So is that the pace that is going to be sustainable? As you mentioned, Pentagon officials, including the press secretary, John Kirby, said that's going to increase to 5,000 to 9,000. But it's hard to imagine everything that has to fall in place in order to get to that number and when we will see thousands coming from Afghanistan. So I think right now that is the big question and the big criticism from Democrats that there wasn't a more cohesive plan already in place so that when the Taliban took over, many of these people were already evacuated and that the airport would already have been secured and that people would be coming here without the sort of chaos that we are all watching unfold.
And Eli, as Weijia points out here, the criticism is coming not just from Republicans, but from members of the president's own party. So to what degree is the White House actually taking responsibility for what is happening in Afghanistan?
Well, Jake Sullivan echoed what the president said yesterday when he said the buck stops here. He said the buck stops with all of them. They take responsibility for all of the decisions that they are making as a team. There have been some recriminations coming from the intelligence community that feels this president didn't really heed their warnings about what could go wrong with the exit like this. The White House wants to maintain some cohesion throughout the administration. But, you know, this happens when things go sideways. And this has clearly gone sideways. The pictures tell you that. And at this point, you know, you see a White House and a president who is defiant, who has dug in on this decision. He has made this decision in his gut. You know, going back months, if not years. This was something he announced less than 3 months into his presidency, and he has stuck by it. And at the root of it all is a distrust of the generals who for years would try to sell, you know, escalations of the conflict in Afghanistan, asking for a little more time. You heard the president refer to them implicitly yesterday, saying, I'm not going to mislead the public and say that we just need a little more time. The president stopped listening to the generals on Afghanistan a long time ago. You do wonder if he perhaps disregarded some of the advice coming his way about what could go wrong with the exit. But this is a more stubborn, dug-in approach from this administration than we've seen on other issues where they've been quicker to course correct. And I'm not sure if they believe this will be a lingering political issue. Those images will be in campaign ads right along with the president's claim that you are not going to see rooftop rescues. You are not going to see the Taliban overrun the country. Those comments, those images will be tied together in campaign ads in 2022 and 2024. Whether they hurt the president remains to be seen. You showed the poll earlier that the withdrawal was popular until it wasn't. And when did it stop being popular? A couple of days ago when the Taliban overran the country. And so I think the White House has been mostly focused on a domestic agenda. They believe that this was the right thing to do, and you hear the president continuing to defend the overarching decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. But they have still struggled to come up with a real explanation for why this has been such a mess, the actual execution of the drawdown. And to Weijia's point, she asked great questions today at the briefing. They do not appear like they are going to every last effort to get every last person out. And that may be because it's not possible to get every last person out. But the optics of this, you know, there's a little more callous indifference being presented from this White House than we're used to seeing from a president who, for the most part, people look at as somebody who has long embodied empathy and concern for other people.
Eli, I want to go back to something you talked about a moment ago about the idea of this being perhaps not a lingering political issue for this White House. Do we know to what degree public opinion may have played a role in the president's decision to stick by this posture of withdrawing all U.S. forces? You talked about the distrust of the generals, but were there conversations within his inner circle about the fact that domestic issues was where they felt the focus needed to be, because that's where the American people's focus was, and it was evidenced by earlier polling, including, I believe, a CBS News poll recently that showed well over a majority of people. I mean, it was, I believe, in the 70s percentage of people wanted to actually have the U.S. withdraw from Afghanistan. But now we are seeing, with these images coming out of the country now, out of Kabul, and those scenes of desperation at the airport, that Politico poll that we showed says that Americans are clearly paying close attention, and now that support for withdrawal has dropped. To what degree has public opinion shaped Joe Biden's approach to Afghanistan? Is it clear?
Well, this is not a decision that was driven wholly by looking at political calculations and numbers. This is something that the president has deep convictions on. That said, the political calculation is there and it's clear. This is something going back to the Trump administration. President Trump also wanted to end this war, believed that the United States needed to focus more on its own country and stop the military adventurism around the world. And, Joe Biden, he's a blue-collar guy from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he has a little bit of that populism in him. And he has tried, in the first 8 months of his presidency to really approach this with a clear and almost narrow focus, you could say, on the domestic agenda, on managing and getting the pandemic under control, and then pushing a really ambitious domestic program of tax cuts and new benefits and infrastructure and all those things aimed at those kind of swing voters. And ending, conflicts like Afghanistan was something that fit into that, even if it was a little bit tangential. And you do wonder if the narrow focus on the domestic agenda may have created some tunnel vision and some blind spots to the potential for a situation like this, if it wasn't executed well, to go sideways on them, because to see the precipitous drop in support for ending the war in Afghanistan, just with a couple of images, haunting images of Afghans clinging to that airplane, that C-17, and seeing the Taliban marauding through the streets of Kabul, if that's enough to change public opinion, those could be the defining images that Americans remember from the Afghanistan conflict. And those are images that convey more failure, obviously, than anything else. And whether it's fair or not, obviously, there were 3 presidents prior to Joe Biden who continue to prosecute this war. Many people are lauding him, people in both parties, for the courage to end it. But nevertheless, rightly or wrongly, he will have to own just how messy the ending is. And these images of defeat could be dangerous for him politically going into the midterms and certainly into 2024.
All right, well, let's turn to domestic issues. Nikole, the House returns August 23rd to take up infrastructure and the $3.5 trillion budget resolution after both measures passed the Senate last week. Moderate and progressive Democrats are divided over how to proceed. So how is Speaker Nancy Pelosi trying to keep her caucus together?
Well, she really is kind of laying down an iron fist on this one in terms of trying to keep her party in line, and so are Democratic leaders for that matter. We know that they did have a caucus call today where Speaker Pelosi really stuck to her guns in terms of wanting to move forward with this plan of implementing a rule that the House would vote on next week to, in essence, advance this budget resolution and also the bipartisan infrastructure bill, although they wouldn't hold a vote on that. They would take that up at a later time. And so what some of these moderates are arguing is that we need to move on this bipartisan plan. And while we're glad to see it advance, we want it to get passed and we want this to move forward without delay. This has historic investment. Why would we wait any longer to do this? But Speaker Pelosi does have a very full agenda for her caucus. This rule would also include a voting rights bill that was just introduced today, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So in essence, this procedural rule that the House is expected to vote on next week would kind of advance all of this. But again, that bipartisan bill would have to be voted on at a later time. And, the reason for that is because, technically the House was supposed to be out for the rest of the summer until late September. But once the Senate did pass that resolution, Democrats wanted to go ahead and act on that. So that's why they're calling the House back. But the thing to keep in mind is with this broader reconciliation package, this $3.5 trillion bill, they're still working on that legislative language. They're still working on exactly what's going to be in it. And so that's why, at minimum, the House can only vote to move it forward. But having an actual vote on that package is going to take several more weeks until they actually finish crafting it. And so again, what these moderates are arguing is we don't want to wait for all of that. We should be taking it up now. But Democratic leaders on this call earlier today really stressed the importance of building consensus within their caucus, not to go against the party on this one, was really the message that kind of came out of this call, that they need to stick together, that they all share the same goals of not only advancing this bipartisan bipartisan bill, but also advancing this reconciliation package, and that in essence they should try to stick with the plan that's at hand. But, you know, some of these moderates are threatening to vote against this rule next week, which would really, you know, kind of wrinkle the operations and certainly kind of make for a messy vote next week if it doesn't proceed.
All right. Well, Weijia, last week, U.S. health officials recommended COVID-19 booster shots for people with weakened immune systems. The White House is expected to expand that recommendation for more Americans. What do people need to know?
So we are expecting a formal announcement tomorrow and for President Biden to make remarks about it. And health experts are likely going to recommend that all Americans, whether they are immunocompromised or not, receive a booster shot 8 months after they received the second dose of whatever vaccine, be it Pfizer or Moderna, that they got. However, what we don't know is how people are impacted if they got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, because we know, according to sources familiar with all the conversations, that they are still waiting for data to come in. They believe a booster will likely be necessary for those people as well, but they're still waiting on the definitive research to come back. We also know that as of right now, they're still studying mixing and matching vaccines. So if you got a Pfizer, the question is, can you get a third shot of the Moderna? But as it stands right now, they're likely going to recommend that you stick with whatever you got, because those results are not in either. And of course, I think the big question is supply, whether the U.S. has enough. And today, Jen Psaki insisted that the administration has been planning for several months for this, so they are confident they will have enough. The question also is whether it will continue to be free for everybody. But I do anticipate there will be some criticism of this from other countries, right? Because you have people waiting for their first doses who cannot access the vaccine, and now they will watch Americans get their third doses. But today, Psaki said she believes that's a false choice. She thinks that there will be enough for everybody. But of course, we have to wait to hear from the health experts about the exact numbers when it comes to crunching them. Elaine.
All right. Highly anticipated information coming out. Weijia Jiang, Nikole Killion, and Eli Stokols, thank you all very much.